New Orleans, September 1874. The city is alive before dawn. Wagons rattle over uneven streets. River air hangs heavy with heat and damp. Gas lamps flicker along Canal Street as businesses prepare to open for another day. On the surface, it looks ordinary, but underneath, the city is braced. For weeks, rumors have moved faster than the Mississippi. Men meeting quietly, weapons changing hands, newspapers sharpening their language. Everyone knows something is coming. No one knows exactly when. And almost no one believes the federal government will stop it in time. This matters because what's about to happen doesn't erupt out of nowhere. It's planned. At the center of Louisiana's government sits Governor William Pitt Kellogg. Kellogg isn't a revolutionary. He isn't charismatic, and he's not especially beloved. He is, however, legally elected. A white Republican aligned with Reconstruction, Kellogg governs a state that, unthinkably to many white elites, now includes Black voters, Black office holders, and an integrated police force. To his supporters, Kellogg represents a fragile but real democracy. To his enemies, however, he represents something far more dangerous, a future where power is no longer theirs alone. On the other side of the city, men are gathering with a different vision of order. One of them is Frederick Nash Ogden. Ogden isn't poor, he isn't uneducated, he isn't an outsider. He's a lawyer, a former Confederate officer, a man of standing. Ogden doesn't shout in the streets, he organizes. He helps lead the White League, a paramilitary organization whose goal is simple and openly stated: to end Reconstruction in Louisiana. Not through elections, but through force. The White League doesn't hide behind secrecy or disguise. They don't deny their ideology. They frame themselves as guardians of civilization, restoring what they believe was stolen after the Civil War. And they are ready. Between these two men, Kellogg in the governor's office, Ogden among armed supporters, stands the Metropolitan Police of New Orleans. This police force is different from any that existed in the South before the war. It's interracial. Black officers patrol alongside white officers. They are tasked with enforcing the authority of a Reconstruction government that many in the city despise. One of those officers is Peter Joseph, a Black patrolman whose name appears in police records from this period. Joseph isn't famous, he leaves no memoir, but his presence matters, because men like him are the proof that Reconstruction is not an abstraction. It is a lived reality, and it's exactly what the White League intends to destroy. By mid-morning on September 14, 1874, the city tension snaps. Thousands of armed White League members assemble. They are organized into columns. They carry rifles and artillery. They march openly through the streets. This isn't protest. This isn't spontaneous violence. It's a coordinated attempt to overthrow the government of Louisiana. Gunfire erupts near Canal Street. The Metropolitan Police try to hold their ground, but they are outnumbered, they are outgunned. Bodies fall in the street, and within hours, White League forces seize the State House and the Customs House. Governor Kellogg flees for his life. For a stretch of that day, The elected government of Louisiana no longer functions. Pause on that. An armed group has taken control of the state government by force. That isn't metaphor. That is definition. This is a coup. And it works. This is Bayou Noire, and this is the story of Liberty Place, America's first successful coup. If you grew up learning American history the traditional way, you were probably told that Reconstruction failed, that it was chaotic, that it was corrupt, that it collapsed under its own weight. And if that's what you learned, then you were gaslit, just like I was. That story has been repeated for so long, it feels like fact. But in Louisiana, in the early 1870s, Reconstruction was not collapsing. It was functioning, and that distinction matters. After the Civil War, Louisiana underwent a transformation that was unprecedented in the South. For the first time, Black men could vote in large numbers. For the first time, Black citizens held public office not as tokens, but as participants. For the first time, political power was contested rather than inherited. This didn't happen quietly. It happened through constitutional conventions, elections, and federal enforcement. Louisiana's 1868 Constitution was one of the most progressive in the nation. It abolished racial discrimination and public accommodations. It expanded public education. It enshrined civil rights at the state level. To white elites who had dominated Louisiana politics for generations, this wasn't reform. It was threatening. It was revolution. By 1874, Black political participation in Louisiana was measurable and visible. Black legislators served in the state house. Black men voted in rural parishes and urban wards. Black officers patrolled the streets of New Orleans. The Metropolitan Police weren't symbolic. They enforced the law. And for many white citizens, that was intolerable. Not because crime had risen, not because the city was ungovernable, but because the old social order was no longer guaranteed. Governor William Pitt Kellogg's administration represented this shift. Kellogg wasn't universally popular. He faced accusations of corruption, contested elections, and constant political attacks. But here's the critical point that often gets lost. Disagreement with the government doesn't make it illegitimate. Kellogg's government was recognized by the federal government. Its authority was grounded in law. Its elections, however messy, were not invalidated. And that's what made it dangerous to his opponents. Because if power could change hands through multiracial democracy, then violence was no longer a last resort. It became the strategy. Across the South, white resistance to Reconstruction followed a pattern. When Black citizens voted, intimidation followed. When elections were won, they were challenged. When challenges failed, violence escalated. Louisiana wasn't unique, but it was central. The state sat at the crossroads of politics, commerce, and memory in the post-war South. And what happened here would be watched closely elsewhere. The White League understood this, and they didn't emerge because Reconstruction had failed. They emerged because Reconstruction threatened to succeed. Their leaders spoke openly about redeeming the state. And redemption didn't mean honesty, and it didn't mean reform. It meant restoring white political dominance by any means necessary. This is where it's important to slow down and be precise. The violence that erupted in New Orleans in September 1874 wasn't driven by desperation. It was driven by calculation. Because you see, the White League believed, correctly as it turned out, that the federal government's commitment to Reconstruction was weakening. Northern voters were growing tired, federal troops were stretched thin, and political will was fading. And so the question for men like Frederick Nash Ogden wasn't whether to challenge the government, it was when. For Black citizens living under Reconstruction, the stakes were existential. Voting wasn't symbolic. Office holding wasn't ceremonial. Political power meant protection. It meant access to schools, courts, and jobs. It meant the difference between citizenship and vulnerability. And that's why the presence of Black officers like Peter Joseph mattered. Not because they were famous, but because they represented a world that could exist, and therefore could be destroyed. By the late summer of 1874, Louisiana stood at a crossroads. One path led toward a flawed but expanding democracy. The other led backwards, towards rule by force, memory rewritten after the fact. The men organizing the White League had chosen their path, and on September 14th, they would act. The White League didn't rise out of desperation. It rose out of confidence. By 1874, the men leading the White League believed history was turning back in their favor, and they believed that they were the ones meant to guide it. In New Orleans, this movement didn't gather in back rooms or disappear into anonymity. It operated in daylight. Its leaders were lawyers, businessmen, former Confederate officers, men who signed letters, chaired committees, and spoke in the language of civic responsibility. Frederick Nash Ogden was one of them. Ogden didn't present himself as a radical. He didn't speak like a revolutionary. He spoke like a professional restoring order, and that was the point. The White League framed itself as a corrective force, not violent, not extremist, but necessary. They described Reconstruction as chaos. They described Black political participation as corruption. They described federal authority as tyranny. And then they offered themselves as the solution. This wasn't accidental rhetoric. It was a carefully constructed public image designed to make violence palatable to people who would never fire a gun themselves, but would fund, excuse, or celebrate those who did. Newspapers played a critical role in this process. Editorials sympathetic to the White League referred to its members as citizens and taxpayers. Violence was reframed as defense. Armed marches were recast as restoration. Words like coup and insurrection never appeared. Instead, readers were told the city was being redeemed. That word matters because when you think about it, redemption implies something stolen, something corrupted, something that must be reclaimed. In this telling of the story, democracy itself became the trespasser. Behind the language was infrastructure. The White League raised money openly, they organized drills, they coordinated across parishes. They didn't hide their weapons, and they didn't hide their goals. This wasn't mob violence erupting in a moment of rage. It was paramilitary organization in service of political power. What makes the White League especially dangerous isn't that it was unique, it's that it was recognizable. Across the South, similar organizations were forming with different names and shared purpose. In Mississippi, paramilitary groups worked to suppress Black voting. In South Carolina, armed men targeted Black militia members and Republican officials. In Louisiana itself, massacres in Colfax and Coshada sent a clear message that resistance would be punished. The strategy was consistent. If elections could be controlled, fine, but if not, violence would decide the outcome. But New Orleans gave the White League something others didn't have: visibility. This was a major American city, a port of international significance, a place where actions could be seen, recorded, and remembered, or so it seemed. Men like Ogden understood that if they could overthrow a Reconstruction government here, in full view, and survive the consequences, they would prove something powerful: that multiracial democracy could be challenged openly, that federal authority was temporary, that memory could be managed later. This is where the respectability mattered most. The White League wasn't asking its supporters to see themselves as extremists. They were asking them to see themselves as guardians. And that framing worked. When the time came to act, thousands answered the call, not because they were desperate, but because they believed they would win. And they had reason to believe that. Federal commitment to Reconstruction was already eroding, Northern political will was fading, and the cost of enforcement was rising. White League leaders were betting not just on force, but on fatigue. They were betting that even if the federal government intervened, it wouldn't stay. They were betting that even if the coup failed temporarily, the long game would still belong to them. And on September 14th, 1874, they would test that theory. By the morning of September 14th, 1874, New Orleans is already holding its breath. The heat settles early, the air is thick, unmoving, and across the city, men are assembling with purpose. They don't gather by accident. They're gathering by design. Thousands of White League members converge in organized columns. They are armed with rifles. Some bring artillery. They don't disguise themselves. They don't run. They march. Frederick Nash Ogden isn't in the streets shouting orders. He doesn't need to be. The work has already been done. The routes are known. The targets are clear. The message has been spread. This isn't a protest meant to be seen and dispersed. This is a seizure of power. Across the city, the Metropolitan Police mobilize. Their numbers are smaller and their weapons are inferior, but they move anyway. Black and white officers take positions knowing exactly what they are facing. Among them is Peter Joseph. We don't know what Joseph thought that morning, but we know what he represented: an officer of the law in a city that had once declared Black citizenship impossible. That fact alone makes him a target. The confrontation erupts near Canal Street, close to the riverfront and the heart of government authority. Gunfire breaks the stillness. Rifles crack, smoke fills the air, and people scatter. The White League presses forward. The Metropolitan Police try to hold their ground, but they are overwhelmed. Witnesses later describe bodies in the street, men falling where they stand, the chaos of civilians caught between armed forces. This is not a riot spinning out of control, but rather it's a battle with objectives. Within hours, White League forces seize the State House. They take control of the Custom House. These aren't symbolic locations. They're the physical embodiment of government authority. By capturing them, the White League sends a message that can't be misunderstood. They aren't challenging the state, they're replacing it. Governor William Pitt Kellogg understands this immediately. Kellogg doesn't issue a defiant speech. He doesn't rally supporters in the street. He flees, not out of cowardice, but out of survival, because staying would have meant capture or even worse. By the afternoon of September 14th, the elected government of Louisiana no longer functions in its own capital. Pause on that. Actually, an armed group has forced the governor to flee and taken control of state buildings. This isn't a metaphor. This isn't exaggeration. This is a total coup. For the rest of that day, the White League holds the city. They control New Orleans openly. They install their preferred officials and they patrol the streets. And then they wait. Not for the police, not for the citizens. They're waiting for the federal government. For men like Ogden, this is the test. Not whether they can take power, they already have. The question now is whether they will be allowed to keep it. Federal troops don't arrive immediately, and days pass. And in that delay, the meaning of the event crystallizes. Because even if the federal government intervenes, and it eventually will, the lesson has already been delivered. Violence can overturn elections. Organization can overwhelm law, and the cost may be temporary. When federal troops finally arrive, they restore Kellogg to office. On paper, the coup ends, but the damage has already been done. The White League has proven its point, and they didn't need secrecy, they didn't need anonymity. They acted openly, violently, and with confidence. And for that, they would never be meaningfully punished. For Black citizens of New Orleans, the message is unmistakable. Voting is dangerous. Office holding is dangerous. Enforcing the law is dangerous. Because protection is conditional and democracy can be revoked. For the nation watching, and many were watching, another lesson is learned. Reconstruction can be challenged. Federal authority can be tested, and time will soften the memory. The city of New Orleans has fallen for a day, but what follows will last far, far longer.